Howard, was he a contactee? And on my personal view is that I believe he was a contactee. And I wanted this other friend of mine, Anne Franks, to come in and speak for a few minutes about a particular meeting he had with a certain individual in Frank's home, which in my mind suggests very strongly that Frank Howard's home was a place where ETs visiting this planet found refuge when they needed it, or a bit of friendly company or conversation. I got to know Frank Howard in the late 1970s through one of his books which our association had in its library. And when I read it, I was very impressed by its quality and its content, and discovered that he also lived in Brisbane, and the address was in the book, so I went to see him. And that's how I came to visit Frank on fairly regular intervals for a period of several years. I don't remember how my friend Bob Lukov came to know about Frank Howard. It could be that he too found out about him through me, but I can't remember. At any rate, he too started to visit Frank at regular intervals and sit down on a Sunday afternoon and talk about the cosmos and other such things. It happened on one occasion that Bob Lukov was at Frank's place, and Frank was visited by a couple of elderly ladies and a man. And this man was unusual in that his skin was covered with what looked like warts from a distance. Everything, every visible square millimetre of skin was covered by these warts, which were about a quarter of an inch or a little less in size, and packed next to each other like little eruptions. And when he shook hands with this individual and felt the back of his hand, there weren't any here, they were there. They were very smooth, you know, not like sort of the rough tissue you get with a regular wart. It was smooth, very smooth as silk. Bob Lukov found he couldn't take his eyes off this guy. You know how it is when you see something really different from the ordinary human form. It's probably repulsive and fascinating at the same time, and that's, I think, the kind of state he was in, but he did his best to be civil. Well, they spent a bit of time conversing on various things, and eventually Bob Lukov left. And he told me the story of this particular encounter sometime after that. I hope he'll still show up today, because Bob is involved in another committee meeting here in the city, somewhere in the city, and may yet come in the next few minutes. I'd like him just to say this to you personally, because it's far better coming from the observer himself. What brought things to a head in my mind was something Duncan Rhodes said earlier this year when Michael Hesseman had been invited to come out and speak on the Roswell footage. Michael didn't come on that occasion because he had a medical problem, and Duncan handled his paper instead. Some of you may remember that event. In the course of his talk here at the QU2 McKinley Theatre, Duncan said how, in response to some of the media work he was doing, letting people know about the Hesseman lecture, a man rang him and told him that in the 1960s, this man was a radiologist in the Royal Melbourne Hospital. And on one particular night, he had the dead shift, which was the midnight to morning shift. There was a telephone call that he should be ready to take a large number of x-rays. And in due course, there was a number of security men came in through the back door, and they wheeled in a dead body, which was placed in the radio x-ray machine, and it was his job to do all the photography. This individual was naked. When this person saw him, he was covered from head to foot with what looked like warts. And as he handled the body to position it for various photographs, he noticed that the skin was silky soft everywhere he touched it. When Duncan said this other story of Bob Lukov's clicked in my mind. And the context of Duncan's story was, the inference is that some security people were bringing in the body of an individual who apparently was considered alien. Otherwise, why would they do this in the dead of night? Because the body was again whisked away, all his photographs were taken off him. And that was the last this radiologist was involved with the matter. But it clicked in my mind, and I thought to myself, well, maybe the man that Bob Lukov described was an alien too. Until then, I just thought he was an unusual human individual. Now, Frank Howard in his books describes a number of things. The titles of his books are several. One of them is A Planetary Saga, which concerns itself mainly with the origins and history of this planet, and particularly its humanity. The second book is called Journey into Space with Alexandra, and that describes a journey that Frank goes on in the company of this friend of his ET called Alexandra, and this ET's spouse, who I think is called Elanza. They travel on the surface of the globe, visit various continents. He's eventually taken to an alien base in Antarctica, in the course of which they penetrate solid ice to get into the base. Then he's also taken to a base, an alien base on the moon. And in all this, Frank meets the persons in that base, and lengthy discussions and discourses take place. And all in all, it gives an extremely detailed body of information. I'm not saying facts, because we're not claiming this to be fact at the moment, about the way aliens think and operate in our sphere of interest. The third book is The Return of Alexandra, during which Frank describes an occasion when this individual, Alexandra, and his spouse visit a meeting of this association as it happened sometime in the 60s or 70s. There's quite a detailed discussion of the events of that meeting and how after the meeting they all go out, which they typically did, to carry on their discussions, and guess what? There were a few UFOs sighted, and they try a little experiment and say, what if we all ask you to do so-and-so, and guess what? The thing did so-and-so, you know. In his fourth book, Alexander's Message to the Nations, he really repeats the messages, or the moral messages, if you like, or the advice that has been scattered throughout the first three books. Now, the books are presented as inspired writing. Frank in no place claims that they are physical direct experiences. And when I asked Frank about it, he was always rather evasive in being exactly explicit as to how he came by that material. Now, to give you a slight insight of the reason why I was so interested is, I had read very widely by the time I came across Frank's work. And you know, if someone had sat down and tried to fill in the gaps in our knowledge about what's going on in the rest of the universe, I just don't know of another book that does it better. I couldn't find a single detail that I, in my understanding of things, would have wanted to fault it. I thought to myself, how can this individual, who presents himself as a relatively uneducated man, whose speech is not that of an educated person, get everything so spot on, even in all the fields where I thought I was fairly expert, you know, in all the sciences and technicalities and so on. Frank, in my mind, seemed spot on at every point. Now, I really was keen to know how he got his information. I was very impressed by it. On top of that, all the books are written in a poetic style. It is not only philosophically and technically very, very astute, it's also quite an interesting piece of literary work. Because when you write poetry, you can say a lot in a single line, because you can allude to a whole lot of concepts just in the flow of words and so on. And that work is a mastery at that kind of thing. So that's why I was impressed with Frank's writing. There was a tremendous gap between the quality of his books and the way the man presented himself as a fairly ordinary individual with a fairly ordinary background. And it puzzled me for a long time. I always thought his books were very important, but I never did much about it. Frank eventually moved away. He died later on, I think in Canberra. And then I always felt that something should be done with his work. Here is a man who lived in Brisbane, who did world-class works, in my opinion, on the subject of UFOs. We, the most responsible association, have been doing nothing about it. So I've been feeling for years that we should pick this up. And we are doing it. A small group of us have established a foundation which is dedicated to the publishing of these books so that more people can become aware of them. Now, the books are filled with philosophical and spiritual and other sorts of notions, shall I call them, which many researchers found unpalatable because they're more nuts and bolts oriented. Well, we can't help that. But for decades, that attitude has prevented these books from getting a hearing. So we hope to give them a hearing through a separate channel. But the thing that strikes me is that we may have enough evidence to indicate that Frank was really a contactee in the nuts and bolts sense. That people walked in his front door who came from other worlds. And he was host to them, and they sat down and talked and had a cup of coffee and went to shop in town and did all the ordinary things that you might do when you're visiting a foreign country. Now, I really think that is the image that is emerging, and the source of Frank's information is factual, not imagined, I suspect. Well anyway, I think Bob Lukov is possibly not making it today. It's unfortunate, because I would have wanted to hear it straight from the observer himself. We have a collection of Frank's works outside. I do commend them to have a peruse them and have a look at them. I can't think of a better source of information for establishing a conceptual background into which the UFO phenomenon possibly could be interpreted. Thank you very much.